bruh, bruh, bruh. Hey kids, remember when you used to wake up early for Saturday morning cartoons and your biggest worries in life were whether or not the princess was in this or another castle? Let's go back there, because it's Throwback Thursday. Well, hey there everybody. It is time to review a vintage game in this Throwback Thursday episode. And we are going back to the Apogee Software Company for a DOS game. And if you remember, I've mentioned this before, in the same way that Activision games on the Atari 2600 were just a cut above, just one step better than everything else that was being put out on the platform at the time, including the stuff Atari themselves were putting out in a lot of ways. Activision just meant quality. And in the early days of DOS gaming, the same was true of Apogee. And they had a really interesting business model, which is that they sent out all of their games as shareware. They had like the first few levels that they would give out as shareware. Actually, what they would do is they would release it as episodic content. So for Duke Nukem, the original Duke Nukem game, which was not 3D and did not have, stripper flashes and whatnot, the aspects, the more lewd and crude aspects that we have come to expect, which come to us via the Duke Nukem 3D franchise, they were not there in the original. And I'll tell you what, I enjoyed playing the original first. I loved me some Apogee games back in the day. I spent a lot of time playing things like Monster Bash, Hocus Pocus. Those kind of things were my jam back in the day. And to say nothing of Duke Nukem, which I also really, really enjoyed. Now, there is a whole backstory. You are fighting one Dr. Proton, who is a madman hell-bent on destroying the Earth with his army of robots. And you chase him down to his moon base as Duke Nukem, the titular hero of our game here, and you go and do some awesome platforming, awesome times. And it's so funny to look at this game now and realize just how much of the graphical interface is taken up by your health info, your stats, your inventory, all of that kind of stuff. It's funny because there's no way that a game built today would, put the actual gameplay in a smaller window just so that they could show a health bar that is, by all estimations, oversized. So there are a lot of things in this game that indicate this is from 1991, which by 1991, obviously we have had multiple entries in the Super Mario Bros. Franchise. And so, yeah, some of those things about platforming had already been well established. It's not like Duke Nukem was inventing platforming. But, the PC was a very different animal in terms of gaming back in the day. Because, in a lot of ways, your average PC was better built for gaming than your NES-type console. But people were optimizing for the NES. You had a lot of developers developing for the NES. And for DOS, for PC-based gaming, it was a different world. And it was, a world specific to uber nerds and mega dorks, such as myself. And so, yeah, it took a while for DOS stuff to catch up in a lot of ways. And so, while this would have been somewhat primitive compared to the NES games of the day. Hold up. I'm going to do us all a favor and look up what came out on the NES in 1991. Okay, it's not like it's much. It's just Battletoads, the most fiendishly difficult game on the NES. Micro Machines, which is just excellent, absolutely fantastic racing game. Tecmo Super Bowl, Vice Project Doom, better than people remember, and in a lot of ways much more technically impressive than Duke Nukem. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3, The Manhattan Project. Yeah, So Metal Storm, my goodness, what a great game that one was. Yeah, there are just some things that were released. Ninja Gaiden 3, these are the types of things that are being released on the NES at the time. And, graphically a little more grown up and gameplay wise a little more grown up than what you're seeing in Duke Nukem on the PC. And yet, what is the charm of the game? Well, the charm of the game is, in some ways, it is its primitive nature, because you are seeing a series that became much more deep and interesting as time went on. I mean, there is one other 2D Duke Nukem game, and that is Duke Nukem 2, which is superior, and I do enjoy it more. And I actually played it first. I played Duke Nukem 2 before I played Duke Nukem 1, but when it came time to review these, I was like, let's not jump the gun. Pun intended. So, yeah, we're seeing what there is to see with Duke Nukem 1, and what there is to see is that this game is fun. It has decent controls for a PC platforming game of this time. It took a while for platforming to get good on the PC, and this is one of the early good titles that got it right. And, yes, later on you have, like, Jazz Jackrabbit, which takes this same... Jazz Jackrabbit shows how, this same formula of platforming and shooting can be done, really optimizing what the PC is capable of. And Duke Nukem, has kind of primitive-ish graphics, and you've got that beautiful PC speaker sound that is just primo. The sound of this game, it does take me back to a place and a time, because it was a different gaming world at that time. But, does this game work, first of all? Does it do what it's supposed to do? Yes, it does. It's a little blinky, and that's not just in emulation. I am playing this in emulation, but even if I were to, get a game capture feed and, run it off of my Windows XP machine, booted back out into DOS mode, if I were to, which is what I would have to do to be able to run this in its native settings. And if I were to do that, it would be just as, kind of frame droppy, blinky as it is in emulation, because that's how the game played. Apogee themselves improved by leaps and bounds in a very short amount of time, because they just got all of their best people and had them do all of their best work. And if you look at what Apogee was cranking out at this time, it is an absurd murderer's row of great content. It really, really is. And so Duke Nukem is right there at the beginning. I mean, this is one of the early knock it out of the park Apogee games. And, created a character that then went on to do other things that people loved more. But the bones are there in this game, and it is fun and funny. It is fairly difficult. It seems like health pickups came at exactly the right times, because I did keep dying, as it got harder, I did keep dying. And so when you die, it just boots you back to the beginning of the level that you died on, which, is funny, because back in the day, a lot of it, that's the modern way to handle it, actually the modern way would be checkpoint, and so you don't lose quite as much progress. Back in the day, it was just kind of well, suck it up. Get good and suck it up was kind of the approach to everything, that everybody would be like, yeah, you got to get good and you got to suck it up if you're not doing well. And that's just funny when you think about how the gaming world has evolved, because it's not like games don't expect you to get good now. They just don't punish you the way that games used to. And so starting back at the beginning of the level is a little bit of a pain in the butt, but it's not as big of a pain in the butt as a lot of games were. I can point to dozens and dozens of like really fun games, great games, where, you know, you die and it's like, well, start the whole thing over. You know, that's just how we used to do back in the day. We punished ourselves for not being good. And that's an entirely different approach. So I have a hard time not being nostalgic for this because I do love the golden age of Apogee, and I consider this a golden age Apogee game, at least a very early one. And also, I do love the side-scrolling 2D Duke Nukems. I do. I cut my teeth on those. Those are the first Duke Nukems I played. And although, yes, Duke Nukem 2 is better, there's a lot to this game. It has 3 episodes, and each episode has 10 levels. So that's 30 levels to make it through in order to properly beat this game. It's a lot to do. It is a lot to do, but it's still quite fun, and perhaps, you know, I have those nostalgia blinders on, and maybe everything that I think about it is wrong, but whatever. Anyway, so what am I going to give this game? I'm trying to be reasonable. I think a reasonable score is a 7.5 out of a possible 10 strippers from Duke Nukem 3D. I think that's reasonable. I think that's acceptable given my tendency to overvalue things based on my own sense of nostalgia. But yeah, Duke Nukem, the original Mamma Jamma. It's still fun, still worth playing. I still enjoy it. And I would be willing to bet that there are those of you who also are like, oh yeah, when I fire me up some DOSBox, this is going into rotation. Anyway, people, that's going to do it for this one. Thank you for being here. I will see you in the next one. Okay, bye.